Welcome back to Flashpoint. Joining us now, Davidson political science professor, Dr. Susan Roberts. Professor, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Listen, I know you've studied abortion and the law for decades in addition to politics. Given that leaked opinion a month ago, I know we expected this ruling, but knowing you and knowing your vast knowledge on these topics, what was your initial reaction?
I wasn't the least bit surprised. I mean, I think that I was surprised at some things in the rulings. Of course, I was surprised at Clarence Thomas kind of wanting to extend the sphere beyond just access to abortion. But I've looked at it for, at least 10 years as one group, Americans United for Life. All over the country, pieces of legislation were in place to circumscribe abortion, access to abortion in any possible way. Things about assisted suicide, that's anything that they consider life affirming. So all these laws were just waiting for the floodgates to open with this Dobbs decision.
And given that, you mentioned Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion and how he brought up contraception and same-sex marriage and same-sex relationships. But given the focus that you just laid out by pro-life groups over the last several decades and the work they've done on the local, state, federal levels, is it fair to draw comparisons? Because the pro-life movement has been one of the most patient and powerful movements in our country's modern history.
It really has. And I think what they've done is over the last several decades, they've diversified their approach. So you have one group that's going strategically and incrementally to chip away and erode abortion, access to abortion, and really behind, underneath the radar. And then you have groups such as the Personhood Alliance, that they're going to look at defining life at, a fertilized egg and giving that egg constitutional rights. And then you have other groups, the heartbeat legislation. So it's very diverse. And some of them really thought if you just overturn Roe, that should be the end of it. But it's just really for people that are pro-choice activists, it's really just opening the floodgates. It's going to be the wild, wild west when it comes to access to abortion, contraception. People just don't know what it's going to be. And if I had one word to say, I think it's a feeding frenzy on the side of the pro-life activist. And I think right now it's just a frenzy on the part of the pro-choice activists, because I just don't think they saw the breadth of legislation that was out there.
Politically, what does this mean for the midterms here in North Carolina, but also across the country, in your view?
Well, I think the dynamics of a midterm election, and political scientists hardly have anything that's like a rule of physics, but a midterm election is usually a referendum on the president and the economy. And President Biden is not doing well on either front. So all things being equal, it should be a red wave, where we saw 2018 was a blue wave. And so you expect the president to pick up seats in the United States House, the United States Senate, and then all the way down ballot. So unless the pro-choice advocates can really turn this into this kind of anti-Dobbs, into what 2018 was an anti-Trump, I see that there'll be big losses. The Republicans will continue to make gains in state houses.
And I want to show a graph that I'm not sure you'll be able to see, but you've probably seen the general idea of it before. And it talks about the sort of future of abortion in North Carolina. Whitney Ross Manzo, professor at Davidson College, took a look at Supreme Court decision on Old North State Politics blog. You can see the graph of how Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated folks feel about what kind of law North Carolina should have. Generally speaking, this was taken leading up to the decision, but it appears that on the left-hand side of your screen, a lot of people want a law that's the same as Roe. And then, of course, once you break it down to more than Roe, less than Roe, then it breaks down along party lines more or so. What do you think about the future of abortion here in North Carolina?
Well, I think if you look at, the prospects for Republicans gaining back at a supermajority, it's very, very good. And I think North Carolina is a state that really is one that the Republicans have just been waiting to be able to enact more and more conservative legislation. And with the Republican Party going more and more into the kind of conservative ideological culture war, I think it's more likely that North Carolina will see in the next after the midterm elections, might even see some heartbeat legislation. One thing that I've studied these groups kind of granular, and Yadkin County in North Carolina was the first county in the United States to become what they call the Personhood Alliance, is a sanctuary city for the unborn. And it really just means that they're going to defy unjust laws, activate the community. It doesn't have a lot of clout in terms of what's going to happen, but it's part of the kind of hyper local, pieces of legislation or pieces of kind of activism that can happen.
What do you think it means, back to the topic we brought up a few minutes ago, what do you think it means for the future of gay marriage?
Well, I think it's not a logical extension, but I think that logic may have nothing to do with it. And I think even if you look at laws concerning surrogacy for same-sex adoption, that is probably the first thing that will be eroded, because I think it is directly tied more to what they would call, kind of life-affirming or contraception. And so I actually am not one to make those projections, but I think that at least some in terms of surrogacy and in vitro fertilization, they're definitely on the table.
And what do you think this says about the general shift about the country and what it's going through? Do you think like these decisions and the decisions of the Supreme Court reflect a more conservative lean in the country, or do you think there is a disconnect?
I think there's a disconnect, and I think there's been a complacency on the side of the pro-choice movement. And it's really the conservative menu and the agenda, including critical race theory, all sorts of initiatives, are ones that people just didn't see coming in terms of how they were. And I use this only in the sense of using them, but they've been exploited by some governors around the country. And I don't think people anticipated this. I think if you look at the number of states that have trifectas in terms of the Republicans would control the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion, you have a preponderance of those. I think 24 of those are controlled by Republicans versus 13 that are controlled by Democrats. And so if you have that many state houses, and these things are now at the state level, you're going to see much more restrictive legislation all the way down the line.
And it's been an intentional effort. I mean, I read an article the other day about how the most underreported story of the Obama years was the sort of takeover of Republican legislatures in all 50 states, and how at the time, not a lot of people were paying attention, but Republicans in many cases, both legislatively and policy-wise, like with this case, have been putting in years of work.
Yes.
And to the surprise of perhaps of many. All right, Susan Roberts, politics professor up at Davidson. Professor, thanks as always. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
More Flashpoint after this.